Hi everyone. Today I wanted to discuss the transatlantic accent or mid-Atlantic accent and how they fall into what's called the World English Standard. So to get started here, Alta Language Resources explains that the transatlantic accent or the mid Atlantic accent was a non rhotic style of speech taught in affluent schools along the East Coast and in Hollywood film studios from about the late 1910s until the mid 40s. It was really initially favored for its sophistication and neutrality, but it was 100% very synthetic, not at all real. You would recognize it if you watched a lot of the old pre 50s movies with Cary Grant um, and Audrey Hepburn and all of those actors and actresses. Um, the accent was coined the transatlantic or mid-Atlantic accent because it sounded really like a mixture between American English and British English. Um, Another way to kind of put it is imagine you have a group of people in a country right smack dab in between Britain and America. That's another way to think about it. The dialect was based off actually a standard of English known as World English, which was created by an Australian, sorry about that, phonetician named William Tilley. Tilley believed that World English was a far superior standard that really signified an individual being educated and cultured. Prominent figures, admirers, and entities such as, like I said, Audrey Hepburn, Jackie Kennedy, used World English, as well as the Hollywood studios really pushed this necessity on that accent, the transatlantic accent, which is subsequently birthed from the World English Standard. About the mid 40s to early 50s, the accent fell out of style, but it is still nodded to in today's society, especially Hollywood. A few examples of this is if you've seen the Hunger Games, Effie Trinket, a lot of the Capitol citizens from the Hunger Games, they really have that accent. Um, Darth Vader, um, the voice of Darth Vader, he really employed a transatlantic accent. Um, Usually in today's media, especially, it's used to make fun of quote unquote snobby people who think they're just better than you just because they're a bit richer, or so it's really used just for a humor device in a lot of comedies. Frasier is a really good example of this. If you ever watch an episode of Frasier before, um, so some people, even though the transatlantic accent isn't really used today, um, there is still a good debate, like we're learning, for what William Tilley really wanted, a standard of English. Um, and in his book, though, the world standard of English. So, according to Desley Deacon, part of Tilley's innovation as a proponent of the direct method was to was to teach speech patterns um, based on the spoken rather than the written word, and to use the relatively new International Phonetic Alphabet developed by Henry Sweet to accurately describe each sound. He used this to really contribute and champion what he called World English. He and his followers deemed the form appropriate for, like I kind of said in the beginning, for the educated and cultured, but he also believed it was easier to understand, as well as sounded more beautiful than the other dialects in English. Um, some of the critiques were on, for example, a Midwest dialect of English or Southern dialect, or even Australian in some parts of Britain that really emphasize that hard R, whereas World English really doesn't. Um, you can think of this, for example, with Roosevelt, with his famous speech, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." He would pronounce it. He wouldn't put emphasis on that R in with fear. He would say fear. Um, that's just one example of that. So another kind of fast forwarding away to today, there's like I said, there are still advocates for a standard of English. One one organization is called Ahead Online, who advocates for a standard of English, and they also provide training for people who are learning English as a second language, and they really push for a neutral version. The reasons they cite for a the reason they cite why a neutral version is better, it's easier to understand, easier to adapt. Neutral English is easier to learn, easier for you to understand people. Neutral English is a universal English. The basically what it boils down to with their argument is the main neutral English will not only be able to be adapted to more situations. You're not set in one sole dialect. Um, so you could adapt it a bit more in their mind. You could adapt it more easily to a southern dialect or a Midwest dialect or even a British dialect. Um, but also to be you'd be able to learn free of other dialects, because of the sounds and slang that come along with each dialect. Even, for example, the Midwestern dialect, it's divided into so many. Of the Wisconsin accent, like you have, for me, for example, I'm a lifelong Youper, so the UP accent. Um, so their argument is that you'll be able to learn it easier because you're not worried about all the slang words that come with all the other dialects. So some on the flip side of the debate, there are many proponents against a world standard like Tilly envisioned. Um, the Guardian, for example, speaks about how we as a society have globalized to the point where accents are starting to disappear. So if we adapt a our language into one dialect, a neutral dialect, already you are seeing with the globalization, and especially when the internet, um, because of the internet being so prominent with everyone interconnecting around the world, not only physically, but like I said, over the internet, you're seeing more and more accents starting to disappear, or you're seeing people from um, totally different dialects taking on another dialect. Um, a push even further to take on another point was a push even further to take on a neutral accent means diversity of dialects could wholly disappear all in themselves. So you have this diversity, sadly, of dialects that this rich, all the rich culture that comes with it would disappear basically. And that even, I know it sounds crazy to think about, but you have different dialects. Even we're learning about African American vernacular. Um, just think about that. If that whole, just the cultural implication, if that was just to be wiped away. Um, so then, also, another voice on this side of the debate, Urban, shed some light on how FDR's transatlantic accent was perceived as a superior accent. So just not FDR, but you have Jacqueline Kennedy and all the and Hepburn, all of the people that had that accent play it. It goes into if we go even today, if we have an accent that is a standard English accent, that would be treated as the superior accent or dialect. We have this, we might treat different groups of people differently. So that's an argument that is used too. If we put superiority on another dialect just held by a certain amount of a certain population group or populations over another, such as AAVE, um, does that disadvantage people? And we can see it does in everyday life. It doesn't give a equitable. Um, it doesn't treat people equitably and equally. So is what I'm getting at with that. More of a balanced view on this. So what I consider a balanced view is that there is utility in using a standard English accent, something that Tilly did envision. The VCU Scholars Compass offers more of a balanced take on this as well, on using a neutral dialect. So they say because of code switching, because code switching reflects the complexity of the 21st century's global community. Actors and this is speaking more to actors, but it does apply to more people in different professions. Actors need to have not only the tool of neutral American dialect, but also to be able to access any other dialect that should be asked of them. However, respect should be given to his native dialect, not only for the obvious reasons of cultural sensitivity, but for the practical reason in order to survive in certain situations, a human being must communicate their relevance to that group. So basically, being able to code switch into different situations with different groups, but also keeping your original dialect, because we as humans have they go on to explain we as humans um, psychologically at first don't trust somebody with a different dialect as an unconscious bias. So we could be automatically wary of somebody that comes in with a um, totally different dialect than we are. Also, Wikipedia as my last source for this talks about somebody named Edith Skinner. She was I cringe at the term follower, but that's what these people are described as, a follower of Tilly. Um, so she really believed in solely the application of the transatlantic accent as a world English standard in a theater capacity. So, like the VCU Scholars Compass talks about, she believes that you should be able to learn to have a more neutral dialect to be a more effective performer. So, my thoughts in all of this. So I and mine is a more balanced view. So I do believe there is merit in a world language. Um, for starters, I think if we if we do, we first of all need to be um, cognizant of of other dialects and how the world communicates, and be able to keep that alive in our communities, because I do, in all of the communities around the world, in the English speaking world, um, just because there is so much importance in culture, and culture has brought us so many wonderful things, especially in our country where it is a melting pot of different people. Um, but with having a set world language as far as communicating in a professional sense and a written sense, I believe there's merit in that, and I do believe there's merit for people that are learning English as a second language. English is is one of the most spoken languages in the world. So just with how many dialects there are, I could just imagine my head spinning if I was learning English. Um, I also think there's implications as far as a transatlantic accent goes in movies. Movies would not be the same without people like Cary Grant, um, Audrey Hepburn, people, those really key stars. And I think their movies have been used have been the hallmarks of their movies have of course been used in our society, in our movies today. And I just don't think cinema, as somebody who loves movies and cinema, I don't think it would be the same without that part of history. um, and I also see, funny enough, um, I also do see things in pop culture returning to a transatlantic accent or something relatively similar. You see this big push on TikTok. You see celebrities really adorning this transatlantic-ish accent, such as Harry Styles. So you do see this return, and uh, um, I think, like I said, there is utility in it when it is because of globalization. Not really utility, I guess, but just a necessity to have a new some sort of neutral standard of English. But my where I kind of draw the line with the standard of English or a world standard, um, like I kind of talked about with the arguments against it, um, putting a premium on someone who speaks in what Tilly would call a superior accent. Um, I think that's very dangerous. I think when you have a group of people that are deemed superior, no matter if it's based on race, socioeconomic status, or just how they communicate on a daily basis, I think that's dangerous, and I think that gives um, the quote unquote superior class, um, in their minds, license to discriminate against the not so the not superior class. So I think there is real dangerous in putting societally a premium on a certain aspect, such as our speech. So I think that's where I have issues with that. But thank you guys so much for your time. It's a bit lengthy, but there was so much to cover with this topic that I never thought there was, and it was just super interesting, and something that I think is going to still be talked about even to this day, even I mean decades or centuries into the future. So thank you.